G'day everyone, I'm Wayne Dowson from Wayne Dowson Fine Art. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to share with you all the 8th portrait in my Anzac series. This is Australian digger Colin Leece. Colin served during World War II with the 2nd 6th Machine Gun Battalion in New Guinea. In part 1 of Colin's interview, Colin sailed to Port Moresby aboard the Taroona and was awaiting orders from General Vasey. We continue Colin's story in part 2 of his interview. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Colin Leece.
Next thing we get word, 26 planes to leave from Jackson's drome and Ward's drome in Moresby to go to the Ramu Valley. And our job in Ramu Valley was, apparently they were just started to put a fighter strip in the valley, one of the furthest frontline strips, and our job was to go up there and defend the strip at all costs. Going up, the planes went over the mountains and down into the Ramu Valley, and it was more or less all kunai grass that grows in the valley, and they got down as low as they could to the kunai grass because the captain, the pilot said the jet fighters couldn't get down low enough to get us because we were flying without an escort. Anyhow, we landed in the valley, and as soon as we got just out of the plane, we heard 2 shots fired, and we thought, oh, it's going to start right now. So we whacked up a couple of guns, but it finished up. It was a Yank company there, American company there, manning both the guns. And apparently they were just clearing the guns, and we thought it was action had started. There was a company went up before us and dug trenches for us and gun pits. We set up our gun pits, and we got bombed and strafed every 2 or 3 days. I think they dropped 50 or 60 bombs in one area, and they strafed us all the time.
Okay.
Jack Davies had a picture of his wife, and she always had this fur coat on. And they come down strafing one day, and a bullet went through his one-man tent and hit the photograph. And the boys all reckoned it was the first time she nearly had the fur coat off. We were sent out in patrols, and there was only one track out of the valley up into the hills, and where the track started, it was called Jeephead, and we had to go up there and make sure it was all clear, all the villages was clear. And one of our first patrols that went up there was attacked by the natives, and they didn't know one from another, Japanese. They'd fired arrows at us, and the police boys shot one of the main offenders, and that quietened them down. But we had to do that every now and again to make the aerodrome clear. But, there was a lot of funny times. I know the Japs come over one day bombing, and a couple of the Yanks, they built slit trenches for toilets, you know, and there was just a pole across it. And the Japs come over, started to bomb, and they took off, these 2 Yanks. They'd been in a jeep, took off and seen this trench and jumped in, and they were up here in the but they didn't come out of it. And another fellow that was Les Mose, his name was, he was with Headquarter Company, and of course there was a trench there, and all the captains and the head strangs were in this trench, and Les come galloping down to this trench, and they said, "You can't get in here, son." He said, "You can't get in here, there's no room." He said, "Make bloody room," and he jumped in on top of them. But that was our main job, was to protect that fighter strip. But we had a lot of bombers come over, and they had finished up. They got quite a few planes on the strip, and they brought in the aerocoblers, and they used to go, when we got word that the planes were coming over, the aerocoblers used to go up high. Took them 5 miles, or 5 kilometres or 5 miles to turn, and they used to just drive straight down and knock one out and go back up again. But we had one bomber who used to come over every morning before daylight, and we nicknamed him the Milkman, because he'd come over just before daylight, and the milkman used to go around with him. We never had any night fighters there, and they brought a Beaufort up, and he got him one morning when he was up there waiting for him. The part we were in was one of the worst parts of New Guinea. It was Ramu Valley was the name of it, we called it, but Ramu in the natives' language is death, so they known it was Death Valley. And I think there was every type of disease going in the valley. There was scrub typhus, and there was all sorts. But, well, I finished up, I got bags of fluid under my armpits, and one of the bomb raids we had, I got hit down the back with gravel and dirt. Then I got the flu bad, and I went up to the RAAF tent, and I passed out in the tent. And of course there was only orderlies there, blokes that was orderlies or stretcher bearers. And he said, "Oh, well, should take these two," when I come round and it, he said, "Take these 2 asprays." He said, "Take one now." He said, "Take one later." Next day I went out and patrolled for 3 days, slept in the jungle overnight and on the ground. And it'd rain, you know, and you'd be down there with your leaves or something under you, and you'd lift your shoulder up and let the water run down. Then you lift your hip up and let the water run down. And anyhow, when I come back from discharge, I had a heart attack just after I come home, and my doctor, he was up in the valley somewhere too, and he said, "Colin," said, "you've had rheumatic fever." He said, "Did you have it up in the islands?" I said, "No." I said, "I had the flu bad." I said, "No, just give me 2 asprays to take." He said, "You had rheumatic fever." He said, "And that's what's caused a scar or something on your heart." But I had those 3 toes on that foot was eaten when I come home. They were eaten through to the bone with tinea. And I finished up on leave. I went to a specialist down in Civic, opposite Civic Station. He was upstairs, and he had a look at it, and he said, what were they doing for that?" And I said, "Well, they're putting triple dye on it." He said, "That's only for horses." I'd have lost the 3 toes only for him, see, because up there your boots and socks, you don't take them off, you got them on all the time, and sweat pours out of you just standing in the one place. You're out on guard of a night, and you'd sit with your rifle and your bayonet like that. That's how you'd sit on guard for a couple of hours. And you'd put your hand up like you couldn't see your hand. It was that dark. And you'd hear wallabies or something running through the bushes. You'd think it was a Jap sneaking up on you. And it was like that. You'd be there for 2 hours just sitting there, you know. You'd have a string on your mate's big toe or something when it was his turn, because you never couldn't talk or anything like that to one another, because if the Jap was there, he'd hear you. And they had a terrible habit of getting round of a night. We were there for nearly 12 months till they got the script going properly, and because they were still working on it when we went up there. Then unluckily they broke us up. Some of my men went to Tarracana, Borneo. I went to Borneo with some of the men that was in my section. 10 men I think it was in my section. This fellow here, when we got broken up, he went to Malaya. He was in my section, he was one of mine. He got killed at Tarakan. My #1 gunner, Dub Mouse, he got his lip shot away. Ricochet, I think it was. But they fixed up his lip, it finished up, he only had a bit of a mark inside of it. But Bluey got killed. I've carried that ever since the war. Asked a lot of the NCOs were sent back home to train reinforcements because it was getting near towards the end of the war. Anyhow, we come back and we come home on the Katoomba and landed in Southport, I think it was, and we went by train down to Sydney. Then from Sydney they marched us up the highway, the old highway, back to Singleton Camp, where we was training these fellas there. Well, while we was there, the Japs broke out at Cowra, so they sent us down to Cowra. It was 1,200 broke out. Well, the Japs initially were going to round all the Italians that was down there, and they were going to drive them out in front of them. But the Italians got word that there was going to be a break on, and they all hid. So the Japs broke out, but any of the fellas that had one leg or anything like that, they left them in the hut and set the hut alight. Anyhow, the 2 gunners that was there, I think he accounted for about 80, because they were throwing blankets on the wire and then running over the blankets. They accounted for 80, but finished up his gun locked, and he had the brains to pull the lock out and chuck it away. But they clubbed those 2 fellas to death. They had sticks with the slicing machines off the bread cutter on the end of the sticks. They had baseball bats, and they had sticks with 2 wires on the end of it to rake you down the face. We rounded up 800, I think, and put them back in the compound, and from there we got discharged down in Sydney in 1944, I think it was. And that's when I got leave. I was on leave one time and I walked into Hunt's fruit shop in Maitland, and Shirley was serving behind the counter, and I said, well, that girl's for me.
The day after our interview with Colin, he and Shirley celebrated their 68th wedding anniversary. So Jacqueline and I would like to congratulate them both and thank you, Colin, for sharing your story with us all.